Before diving into the video, did you know that over 80% of you watching right now aren't subscribed? Your one like and one subscribe means the absolute world to this channel and helps us keep going. Hit those buttons real quick, and let's get into the video. Chapter 1. The Banquet of Rebirth. Julian was born a tall, rich, and handsome heir to a leading technology enterprise, while Serafina Vance was a beautiful, wealthy heiress. In their original life, theirs was considered a perfect marriage alliance between two equally matched families. Serafina carried herself with an air of detached, refined elegance, but she fell in love with a poor boy named Dominic and wanted to break off their engagement. At the time, the Vance family was facing a severe financial crisis, and Serafina's parents were in poor health. Julian had persuaded her to go through with the engagement first to stabilize her family company's stock price. Serafina accepted, but when Dominic found out, he slit his wrists in protest, spending 3 days and nights in the ICU before cutting ties and leaving the country. Though the wedding proceeded as scheduled, Serafina hated Julian for the rest of her life. Years later, during an outdoor trip, they were caught in an avalanche. In her final moments, Serafina begged him, "In the next life, please stop clinging to me. Let's not be husband and wife ever again." When Julian opened his eyes again, he found he had miraculously returned to the year of their engagement. He smiled, resolving to let go of his past obsession, respect her choices, and let her and Dominic face the natural consequences of their decisions. The story restarts just after Julian graduates from college. His mother, who had single-handedly built their tech company into a regional leader after his father's passing, held a massive celebration banquet for him. While it was advertised as a graduation party, it was covertly a matchmaking event designed to find him a suitable wife from among the gathering of industry elites and socialites. Julian's mother highly admired Serafina because she was genuinely exceptional, inheriting her mother's stunning beauty, possessing graceful manners, and excelling far beyond ordinary wealthy peers. During their middle school days, Serafina had been a shining star in the elite honors class, permanently featured on the student council wall for her academic and artistic talents, while Julian had been a notorious underachiever in the school's worst class. Back then, he had worshipped her from afar, viewing her as the perfect princess and goddess. Julian later went to an ordinary local university, while Serafina went abroad to study, making this banquet their first formal meeting. At the party, Serafina was seated at the head table with Julian's mother, surrounded by enthusiastic relatives attempting to matchmake them. The aunties gushed about them being a perfect, destined couple and brought up a childhood engagement arranged by their families when they were born. Julian's mother signaled him with encouraging eyes to move closer to Serafina. Looking at the roses between them and seeing Serafina's poised, gentle smile, Julian experienced a sudden wave of dizziness as past memories flooded his mind. Chapter 2. The Rejection. In his previous life, Julian had eagerly taken the initiative at this exact moment, declaring that as a man he would naturally take responsibility for the childhood engagement and leave the rest to their parents. The room had erupted in joy, and Serafina had not objected. However, Julian now understood that Serafina's lack of objection was merely due to her personal 3-no principles. Don't initiate, don't refuse, and don't take responsibility. She possessed naturally affectionate eyes that made anyone, even a stray dog, feel intensely loved, hiding the fact that she already had a devoted, puppy-like boyfriend by her side while on a blind date with Julian. That relationship had eventually turned Julian and Serafina from husband and wife into bitter enemies, culminating in the avalanche where she expressed deep regret for ever marrying him. Determined not to repeat these mistakes, Julian calmly put down his wine glass. Adopting the careless attitude of playboy, he laughed and said, "A childhood engagement? Isn't that outdated? The Sterling family works in tech. I'm not interested in the real estate business. And Mom, seriously, you're being way too random. Why are you introducing just any woman to me?" The entire table froze in absolute shock. The Vance family were massive giants in the local real estate industry, and Serafina was a highly sought-after goddess who had never experienced open rejection or embarrassment in her life. Julian's mother, though surprised, respected her son's wishes and remained silent. Seeing Julian's blatant refusal, the relatives immediately pivoted, flattering Julian by saying a young man should focus entirely on his career before settling down. Humiliated and confused, Serafina spent the rest of the banquet awkwardly switching seats before inventing an excuse to leave early. After the guests departed, Julian's mother questioned him about the sudden turnaround, noting that he used to deeply admire Serafina. Julian denied any interest, prompting his mother to smile knowingly and ask why he had secretly given Serafina a custom crystal necklace back in high school. Julian flushed with embarrassment, unable to deny what had been one of the darkest, most painful moments of his teenage years. Chapter 3: The Tacky Gift. At the end of their senior year of high school, knowing Serafina was preparing to move overseas, Julian had wanted to confess his feelings. Hearing her mention that crystals were her favorite things because of their purity, he had stayed up all night drawing design sketches and ordered a handmade crystal necklace from a niche overseas brand. During her class's physical education period, he slipped into her empty classroom and placed the gift on her desk. When he later walked past the room to check her reaction, he found her entire class openly ridiculing it. Her peers laughed at the heart-shaped pendant, calling the design tacky, the unknown brand cheap, and mocking the sender for being unable to afford a real diamond. Julian hadn't cared about their insults until he heard Serafina herself sneer. "Well, it's obviously not anything valuable. My family owns things way better than this. Still, I guess it's better than nothing." That cold reaction had permanently buried his feelings for her. Back in the present, Julian sighed to his mother, dismissing it as youthful stupidity and a past infatuation with a toxic girl, reiterating that he would never marry Serafina. His mother laughed affectionately, telling him he could remain a spoiled, rich master supported by her wealth, but asked about his future career plans. Julian explained that he intended to pursue graduate studies abroad. In his past life, Serafina's deep emotional insecurity, coupled with her fierce ambition, meant she hated seeing him socialize for business. She had demanded he give up his career to provide her with constant emotional support while she attended endless galas, eventually becoming a prominent businesswoman, while Julian became an uneducated, stagnant man behind her. Remembering that regret, he chose to major in computer science abroad. His mother's eyes welled with relief and pride, seeing that her son was finally willing to help shoulder the family business. Julian felt a sharp sting of emotion. In the previous life, he had blindly handed over his company's shares and trade secrets to Serafina's family, allowing the Vancests to devour his mother's enterprise piece by piece, leaving his mother heartbroken and hopeless in her old age after burying her son. He felt immensely thankful that this life allowed him to protect her. Chapter 4: The Illegitimate Princess. A month later, while Julian was home studying for his exams, his younger cousin came over to visit and immediately began gossiping about the latest high society drama. He praised Julian for rejecting Serafina, revealing that she had been caught dating a broke nobody at her company, causing her father and older brother to become furious. Julian instinctively blurted out the name Dominic, surprising his cousin, though Julian quickly brushed it off as something he had merely overheard. In reality, Julian had first discovered Dominic on his past life engagement night, when a drunk Serafina repeatedly mumbled his name in her sleep. Upon investigating, Julian had learned about the poor employee and offered Serafina a compromise. Given the declining real estate market and her parents' poor health, they should maintain the engagement to stabilize the stock prices and address the Vance family debts before making a final choice. Serafina had agreed, but hid it from Dominic, leading the distraught boyfriend to slit his wrists in a display of tragic romance. The incident became Serafina's lifelong regret and the root of her hatred for Julian. The cousin continued gossiping, describing Dominic as a gold-digging, lazy opportunist who spent his workdays flattering Serafina under the guise of being an artsy intellectual. Recently, the two had been caught engaged in an intimate encounter right inside the corporate office. Old Master Vance had fired Dominic on the spot and threatened to disown Serafina completely if she didn't break off the relationship. When Julian wondered if the old man was being overly harsh, his cousin explained the darker family dynamics. Serafina was actually Old Master Vance's illegitimate daughter, raised strictly to be a valuable political marriage pawn. Since the Vance family desperately needed an influx of capital, there was zero chance they would permit her to marry a penniless man or even allow Dominic to become a live-in son-in-law. Julian was already familiar with this background. Serafina appeared glamorous, but she possessed no real authority within her company and was heavily suppressed by her older brother. Old Master Vance had carried on a long-term affair with Serafina's mother while his original wife was alive. Driven to despair, anger, and illness by the affair, the original wife had passed away on the exact day Serafina was born. Consequently, the eldest brother hated Serafina and her mother intensely. Serafina's mother lived cautiously as a second wife with low status, strictly pressuring Serafina to secure a powerful marriage alliance with the Sterling family to elevate their positions and bail out the Vances. With Julian out of the picture, high society's prideful heirs refused to clean up someone else's mess, causing Serafina's standing within her household to grow increasingly miserable. Chapter 5. Business is Business. Sensing her falling status, Serafina reached out through mutual social connections to invite Julian out for coffee under the pretext of catching up as old schoolmates. Julian understood that this meeting was driven entirely by pressure from her family regarding money. She desired love, dignity, and financial security simultaneously. He decided to attend, intending to give her a final push toward her puppy boy to see how long love could endure without financial stability. At the restaurant, Serafina unexpectedly presented the custom crystal necklace Julian had left on her desk in high school, revealing she had known all along that it was from him. She initiated the conversation with her usual trace of aloof arrogance. Treating him like an admirer, she was granting a favor. She had dressed meticulously in a deceptive, calculated student-style outfit, a white shirt with several strategic buttons left undone and a short skirt. Having grown entirely numb to such calculated charms over the years, Julian cut through the small talk and demanded she speak plainly. Serafina dropped her shy act, her expression tightening into irritation as she stated, "Julian, I'll be honest with you. You've probably already heard that I have a boyfriend now. There's no way I'm marrying you. But business is business. I hope you can persuade your mother to invest in the Vance family's new real estate project." Julian openly mocked the proposal, reminding her that his mother was rich but not foolish enough to bail out a debt-ridden company with no relative ties or benefits. Serafina viewed him with disgust and assumed he was demanding her as payment, responding, "Don't worry, as long as your family invests, we can get married first. We can even sign a prenuptial agreement." When Julian inquired about her boyfriend, she answered without hesitation that Dominic was gentle, understanding, and would accept her financial difficulties. Julian ridiculed her for attempting to use him as a backup option to clear her family's mess. Furious, Serafina demanded to know why he was acting this way if he had truly loved her enough to give her the crystal necklace. Realizing that she had fully known of his confession back in high school, yet chose to mock him behind his back to indulge her vanity, Julian felt his past emotions turn completely cheap and hollow. Chapter 6. The Tip and the Elopement. Julian picked up the necklace, grinned carelessly, and lied that he had merely lost a game of truth or dare, which forced him to buy a necklace and confess to a random top female student. He apologized mockingly for giving her the wrong impression over the years. Serafina watched in absolute shock as her proudest source of admiration was reduced to a joke. Julian then waved over a young waitress, handing her the custom necklace as a casual tip. The waitress accepted the expensive item with ecstatic gratitude, leaving Serafina feeling deeply humiliated. Lashing out, Serafina accused him of kicking her family while they were down because of their financial hardships, calling him a money-worshipping elitist who looked down on the poor. Julian coldly retorted that, unlike her, He didn't date two people at once or cling to one person while secretly scouting a wealthier backup. Serafina fiercely defended her love, declaring she would never leave Dominic. Julian pushed her further, baiting her pride by stating that her parents would never allow a marriage to someone so beneath her station. Out of pure spite and defiance, Serafina snapped that her parents could not control her, proudly proclaiming that Dominic was an artistic, sensitive, superior poet whom she would absolutely marry. Julian smiled, wishing them a lifetime of happiness and many children. His reverse psychology blessing worked with rapid efficiency. A month later, Serafina secretly stole her family's household registration book, defied all parental opposition, and legally registered her marriage to Dominic. Old Master Vance was so profoundly enraged by the elopement and the subsequent high society mockery that he suffered a severe stroke and was rushed to the hospital. Stubborn to the core, Serafina resigned from her position, moved completely out of the family mansion, and relocated with Dominic into a cheap, run-down rental apartment. Chapter 7. The Reality of Pure Love. Julian remained focused on his studies while his mother arranged a casual assistant role for him within the corporate office so he could sit in on high-level meetings and understand the rapid evolution of the business world. During the Dragon Boat Festival, he finally relented to his cousin's pestering and attended a wealthy heir's birthday party. Unexpectedly, Serafina, who had entirely vanished from their elite social circle since her marriage, showed up at the venue alone. Seeing Julian, she froze as if wanting to speak, but he completely ignored her, continuing his conversations until she quietly slipped out through a side exit in discomfort. The gathering immediately erupted into gossip, revealing that Serafina had already divorced Dominic after only a few short months. Dominic had originally pursued her solely for her wealthy status, and his face had turned green upon realizing she had left the Vance family with absolutely nothing. No money, cars, or property. Trapped in a cheap rental, Dominic had flatly refused to work, choosing to stay home writing poetry all day, while Serafina, raised as an entitled princess, looked down on low-paying jobs while being rejected by high-paying ones. The severe financial strain led to constant screaming matches. When Serafina became pregnant and demanded Dominic find a job, she discovered he was secretly flirting with wealthy older women online and had gone out to meet one in person. Serafina tracked him down, a violent argument ensued, and she accidentally fell, suffering a traumatic miscarriage. The disaster made divorce inevitable. When Julian suggested she would at least return to her family, the heirs shook their heads. With old Master Vance permanently incapacitated in the hospital, Serafina's ruthless older brother had seized absolute control of the company. He completely stripped Serafina of her shares, banished her from the corporate hierarchy, and removed her entirely from the family registry. He left only basic hospital funds for the paralyzed father, forcing the stepmother to act as a full-time, hands-on nurse feeding and cleaning the old man just to access any allowance. Other than her legal surname, Serafina was completely cast out. High society viewed the brothers' cold revenge as completely understandable, given that the stress of the affair had driven his own mother to cancer and death on the very day Serafina was born. Julian merely sighed, respecting Serafina's choice to preserve her remaining pride rather than taking an ordinary administrative job. Chapter 8. The Return of the Ghost. By October, Julian successfully cleared his English examinations, and by the end of the year, he received an official admission letter from the University of Pennsylvania. His mother was so overwhelmed with emotion that she openly wept and bragged about her son at every subsequent corporate banquet. Before leaving the country, his mother urged him to attend one last large family gathering hosted by an elder relative. There, Julian ran directly into Dominic, who had arrived on the arm of Julian's distant aunt. This aunt was a nearly 50-year-old widow who had inherited a massive fortune, spent her time at exclusive clubs, and frequently kept a revolving door of toy boys. She and Dominic had met at a private club, and within a single week, they had officially entered a sugar mommy arrangement. Upon realizing Julian was the powerful eldest young master of the family, a panicked Dominic pretended not to know him and nervously attempted to flatter him regarding his move to America. Julian barely acknowledged him, feeling absolute disgust. In his past life, Serafina had kept Dominic's photo as her phone wallpaper, mourning her lost love every single day of her marriage, which had culminated in her throwing away Julian's winter survival gear during the Finland avalanche to freeze him to death as a twisted tribute to Dominic. Noticing Julian's intense loathing, his cousin stood up in front of the entire assembly of relatives and loudly exposed Dominic as Serafina's cheating, gold-digging ex-husband who caused her miscarriage and lived off wealthy women. The dependent relatives fell quiet, observing Julian's cold expression. Enraged to discover she was being deceived, the aunt slapped Dominic hard across the face, cursing him for lying to her. Dominic burst into tears, attempting to emotionally manipulate her by crying, "Big sister, how can you doubt me? If you truly loved me, why would you care about what other people think?" While that manipulation had worked perfectly on Serafina, the aunt was entirely unaffected. She only cared about his superficial presentation, not his personality. She immediately called security and had him thrown out of the building, disdainfully remarking to the room that such puppy boys were a dime a dozen in clubs. Chapter 9. Independent Success. A few days later, the aunt filed a formal complaint of emotional fraud against the private club, causing Dominic to be fired and thoroughly blacklisted across high society circles. Left unable to charm wealthy women or survive as a gold digger, he fled the town in deep disgrace. He later attempted to seduce another wealthy woman elsewhere, only for her furious husband to track him down and break his legs, leaving him permanently confined to a wheelchair for the remainder of his life. A month later, Julian boarded his flight to the United States. Out in the airport crowd, seeing him off, he briefly spotted Serafina watching him longingly, but she froze in place upon seeing how celebrated and surrounded he was by loved ones. Julian never looked back, immediately changed his phone number, deleted her contact avenues, and erased her entirely from his life. During his years at the University of Pennsylvania, Julian threw himself into artificial intelligence research projects, collaborating heavily with tech firms and achieving complete financial independence entirely separate from his family's wealth. While studying abroad, he met an incredibly beautiful, decisive, and energetic girlfriend named Vanessa who radiated warmth, positivity, and genuine love. They quickly became engaged. Though he originally planned to settle in America, Julian decided to return home to care for his aging mother. His fiancée fully supported him, sacrificing her own overseas prospects to accompany him. Overjoyed, his mother handed absolute corporate control over to Julian and stepped down into peaceful retirement, safe from ever having her wealth stolen or her life ruined by the Vance family again. Julian jokingly warned his mother to enjoy spa treatments, but avoid keeping any puppy boys around, because looking at them annoyed him, prompting a playful swat to the head from his dignified mother as she hugged him tightly. Chapter 10. The Confrontation with Reality. As the new leader of the enterprise, Julian heavily prioritized artificial intelligence development and corporate philanthropy, partnering with universities to establish full scholarships and donating massive amounts of profit to local schools and charities, earning the company widespread societal praise. During a prominent AI exchange conference held at a university banquet hall, Julian stood on stage as the brilliant keynote speaker and core figure of the local business association. Looking down into the audience at the end of his speech, he noticed a slightly hunched, heavier woman with distinct wrinkles around her eyes desperately moving through the crowd handing out business cards. It was Serafina, completely stripped of her former elegant, untouchable princess allure. Nearby business associates noted his gaze and gossiped about her tragic downfall. The over-leveraged Vance real estate empire had officially declared bankruptcy the previous year. Old Master Vance had passed away, and Serafina's mother was currently bedridden and seriously ill in the hospital. Meanwhile, her ruthless older brother had long since legally transferred the remaining family assets overseas and fled the country to hide from creditors. Left with absolute nothingness and mounting medical bills for her mother, Serafina had been forced to humble herself and work as a low-level real estate agent. Serafina slowly approached Julian's circle to hand out a business card, but she froze in instinctive shame upon recognizing him before forcing herself forward. Julian calmly gestured for his secretary to accept the card. Visibly emotional, Serafina whispered, "Julian, thank you. It's been such a long time. I never imagined that the big figure sharing cutting-edge research today would actually be you." Julian politely and indifferently acknowledged the passage of time, wishing only to end the interaction quickly. Gathering her remaining courage, Serafina wept. "Julian, all these years I've always wanted to see you again. I wanted to personally tell you I'm sorry. I was narrow-minded and short-sighted. You were right. Love without money really is just a joke. Maybe we were actually the most suitable for each other. It's just that I only understand that now." Julian checked his watch impatiently, cutting her off to state that her words held zero meaning now, adding that if she had legitimate corporate business to pitch, she could discuss it with his fiancée, Vanessa. Stunned and bitter, Serafina asked if they were getting married, to which Julian coldly replied that his private life was none of an outsider's business. As he turned to leave, a crying Serafina stopped him one last time, asking, "Julian, back in high school, did you really love me before?" She let out a broken smile and added, "You know, the day you left for America, I had a dream. In that dream, we got married, but I wasn't a good wife. For the sake of another man, I hurt you deeply. Julian, if that dream was real, could you give me another chance?" Julian's heart trembled for a brief moment. The dream, she recounted, was the agonizing reality of the past life he had endured, a deep psychological scar that could never completely vanish. He looked at her with icy detachment and said, "Serafina, no matter what you dreamed about, the past is already gone. We're adults now. We should learn to face reality and keep at least a little dignity." He turned and strode away into the clean air outside, leaving Serafina crouched on the floor of the venue weeping loudly, like a helpless child. Waiting out in the car for him was his loving fiancée, Vanessa, who immediately hopped out to wrap him in a warm, passionate kiss. Looking into her adoring eyes, Julian knew the lingering shadows of his past life were finally scattered, completely melted away by a true and unconditional love as they moved together toward a bright future. Chapter 11. The Foundation of Tomorrow. In the weeks following the Artificial Intelligence Conference, Julian completely erased the brief encounter with Serafina from his mind. His focus belonged entirely to the expansion of the Sterling technology empire and the life he was building with Vanessa. With his mother happily retired, spending her days at high-end spas and tending to her prized orchids, Julian and Vanessa took the next step in their relationship. They purchased a beautiful estate on the outskirts of the city, away from the prying eyes of high society gossip, and began planning their wedding. Vanessa proved to be a force of nature in the corporate world as well. Rather than sitting idly by as an heir's fiancée, she established her own venture capital fund aimed at backing young, independent tech innovators. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and shared ambitions, entirely free of the toxic dependency and hidden resentments that had plagued Julian's previous life. Meanwhile, Julian's AI talent development pipeline began yielding historic results. The first batch of university graduates under his full scholarship program entered the Sterling Labs. Among them were brilliant minds from humble backgrounds who, in Julian's past life, would have never received a chance due to the monopolistic grip of traditional giants like the Vance family. As the Sterling enterprise flourished, the local tech sector experienced a massive boom, firmly establishing Julian as the undisputed pioneer of the region's modern economy. Chapter 12. A Mother's Final Grievance. While Julian and Vanessa thrived, the remnants of the Vance family continued their slow, agonizing descent. Working as a low-level real estate agent, Serafina found herself trapped in a brutal cycle of commission-based survival. The pride that had once defined her goddess-like persona was chipped away daily by demanding clients and condescending managers who took pleasure in ordering a former heiress around. The weight on her shoulders grew exponentially when her mother's health took a critical turn for the worse. Hospitalized with a failing liver, the elderly woman required expensive medications and constant monitoring. Because Serafina's older brother had drained the family accounts before fleeing overseas, there was no safety net left. Desperate, Serafina swallowed her pride and reached out to former high society friends, begging for loans or introductions to wealthy buyers. But the elite circle she had once looked down upon were ruthless. They remembered her arrogant 3-no principles and her scandalous elopement with Dominic. Doors were slammed in her face, and her calls were left unanswered. Sitting by her mother's hospital bed under the harsh fluorescent lights, Serafina looked at her reflection in the darkened window. She had aged a decade in just a few years, realizing too late that the protective shield of wealth she had treated so carelessly was the only thing that had ever kept her safe. Chapter 13. The Echo of Broken Lives. Winter arrived, bringing with it a biting chill that reminded Julian heavily of the snowy slopes of Finland from his past life. However, this time, there was no avalanche, only the warmth of his home and the news of an old acquaintance's final fate. Julian's younger cousin arrived at the Sterling headquarters one afternoon with a grim update from the capital. Dominic, confined to a wheelchair after his legs were broken by a furious husband, had tried to survive by writing a scandalous memoir detailing his relationships with wealthy heiresses, hoping to blackmail his way back into a comfortable life. However, the high society families he targeted wielded immense legal and political power. Before the manuscript could ever see the light of day, Dominic was hit with a massive wave of defamation lawsuits and structural fraud charges. Unable to pay for legal defense or medical care, he was evicted from his subsidized housing and forced onto the streets. According to the police reports, he had passed away quietly from hypothermia in a dark alleyway during the season's first major blizzard. Julian listened to the news in silence, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. He felt no triumph, only a profound sense of closure. The ghost that had haunted his past marriage was gone, destroyed not by Julian's revenge, but by the natural culmination of his own greed and deceit. Chapter 14. The New Dawn. The spring of 2027 brought the highly anticipated wedding of Julian and Vanessa. The event was held at a private coastal resort, attended only by close family, trusted business partners, and the scholars Julian had mentored. It was a celebration completely devoid of the artificial, transactional weight of traditional marriage alliances. When Julian looked at Vanessa walking down the aisle, radiant and smiling with genuine joy, the last lingering scars of his past life officially dissolved. Months later, a localized real estate report crossed Julian's desk. The final properties owned by the bankrupt Vance estate were being auctioned off to clear their remaining state taxes. Among the buyers was Vanessa's venture capital firm, which acquired the old Vance corporate headquarters to convert it into a public AI research academy for underprivileged youth. On the day the new academy opened, Julian stood outside the building, watching children laugh as they walked through the doors. From a distance, standing across the street among the ordinary citizens, an exhausted woman in a faded trench coat watched the ceremony. It was Serafina. She didn't step forward, nor did she cry. She simply watched the man she had once mocked and destroyed in another life, now standing at the absolute peak of honor and happiness. Julian's eyes swept past her without pausing, completely indifferent to her presence. He turned, wrapped his arm around Vanessa, and walked into the building. The past was completely buried, and a bright, beautiful future had finally begun. Chapter 15. An Endless Summer. 3 years after the academy opened, the name Vance had completely vanished from the public consciousness, replaced entirely by the thriving legacy of the Sterling Foundation. Julian's life had entered a beautiful, serene rhythm. The technological empire he built was now self-sustaining, allowing him to shift his focus to what truly mattered, the family he had been denied in his previous life. On a warm July afternoon, the backyard of the Sterling estate was filled with laughter and the sweet scent of blooming jasmine. Julian's mother sat comfortably on the veranda, looking vibrant and youthful as she watched over her 2-year-old grandson, Leo. The little boy had inherited Julian's striking eyes and Vanessa's boundless energy, completely captivating his grandmother, who spent her retirement spoiling him without a single care in the world. Vanessa walked out onto the lawn, carrying a tray of fresh lemonade. She looked radiant, her warmth and vitality completely unfazed by the demands of motherhood and her thriving venture capital fund. She stepped up behind Julian, who was setting up a small wooden swing set, and wrapped her arms tightly around his waist, leaning her head against his back. "The lab just called," Vanessa murmured with a soft smile. The new AI-driven medical diagnostic software passed its final global trials. "You did it, Julian. You're changing the world." Julian turned around in her embrace, pulling her close and kissing her forehead. "We did it," he corrected gently, looking in her bright, adoring eyes. "I couldn't have built any of this without you." As Leo toddled over, tumbling into his father's legs with a joyous shout, Julian scooped his son up into his arms and held Vanessa close with the other. Looking out over his beautiful home, hearing his mother's cheerful laughter from the porch, Julian felt a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. The cold, suffocating shadows of the avalanche had been completely replaced by an endless, golden summer. He had not only saved his family and changed his fate, he had found a pure, unconditional love that would last a lifetime. Chapter 16. The Architecture of Peace. As the years unfolded, the golden summer of Julian's life matured into an era of deep, unshakable stability. The business world continued to evolve, but Julian no longer felt the exhausting urge to race against time or competitors. He had built an ecosystem that thrived on collaboration rather than exploitation, a stark contrast to the cutthroat corporate structures of the old Vance Empire. On a quiet weekend, Julian took Leo, now a curious 5-year-old, to visit the public AI research academy that had once been the Vance corporate headquarters. The cold, imposing marble facade of the old real estate giant had been entirely transformed into a vibrant space filled with natural light, living green walls, and the energetic hum of students learning to code. Holding his son's small hand, Julian walked through the hallways where, in a past life, greed and betrayal had been calculated. Now, those same spaces belonged to a generation of young dreamers building a better world. That evening, Julian and Vanessa hosted an intimate dinner at their estate to celebrate his mother's 75th birthday. The table was filled with laughter, vibrant stories, and a deep sense of gratitude. As his mother blew out the candles on her cake, surrounded by the family her son had fought a literal lifetime to protect, Julian caught Vanessa's gaze across the table. Her eyes reflected the same warmth and unwavering support that had melted the ice in his heart years ago. Later, when the house fell quiet and Leo was fast asleep, Julian stood out on the balcony, looking up at the clear, starlit sky. Vanessa stepped out beside him, draping a warm blanket over his shoulders and leaning into his side. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly, lacing her fingers through his. Julian smiled, pulling her closer against the cool night breeze. In his past life, nights like this were filled with a suffocating loneliness and the bitter taste of regret. In this life, there were no ghosts left to chase, no lingering shadows, and no unspoken apologies. "Just thinking about how perfect the view is from here," Julian replied gently, kissing the crown of her head. He let go of the past completely, stepping forward into a future that was entirely, beautifully theirs.